There's something quietly extraordinary about the people who grew up in the 1970s. Something that psychologists are finally beginning to measure, but those who lived it have always felt. Because the 1970s didn't just produce a generation. It produced a mindset, a way of navigating the world that modern life rarely builds anymore. But before we get into that, let's clear up one huge misconception about childhood development. Most people think that more parental involvement creates stronger adults. More rules, more supervision, more structure. But the 1970s generation, they are the living contradiction to that theory. Picture this. You wake up on a Saturday morning. You pour your own bowl of cereal, no adult hovering, and before your parents even finish their coffee, you're already halfway down the street. No schedule, no GPS, no safety checklist. Just the open world, and whatever your imagination could turn it into. You weren't being watched, you were being trusted. And trust changes a child's brain. Neuroscientists now say this early autonomy strengthened something called self-directed learning, the ability to figure things out without needing constant instruction. 1970s kids didn't wait for adults to set up the game, they invented the game. Now think about the way you moved through a neighborhood back then. You learned the sound of every screen door. You knew which parents were strict, which parents pretended not to see you cutting through their yard, and which parents would actually ask if you wanted a popsicle. This wasn't anxiety. This was environmental intelligence, the ability to understand social and spatial cues without anybody explaining them. You learned to read the world the way some people read sheet music. A half-open garage door meant someone was home. A bike thrown on its side meant the kids were nearby. A porch light flicking on meant time to head back. Kids today rely on notifications. 1970s kids relied on intuition. Then there was the after-school reality. You came home to an empty house, a latchkey kid. Your backpack dropped on the floor, you grabbed a snack, maybe you turned on the TV, maybe you didn't. You handled the silence. You handled the emptiness. And here's the psychology of that. When children spend time alone without fear, they build a sense of internal stability that carries into adulthood. A lot of people today are uncomfortable without noise, without stimulation, without someone responding instantly. But 1970s kids learned something powerful. Silence doesn't mean something is wrong. Silence means you're capable.
And then there was boredom. The kind of boredom that today would be considered a crisis. You'd say, "I'm bored," and your parents didn't panic, didn't rearrange their schedules, didn't hand you a glowing screen. They said, "Go find something to do." So you did. You invented entire worlds using nothing but a cracked driveway and a stick of chalk. You turned boredom into creativity. Psychologists call this divergent thinking, the ability to come up with multiple solutions instead of waiting for one. 1970s kids didn't learn it in workshops or enrichment camps. They learned it because there wasn't anything else to do. And there's more. You didn't just learn creativity, you learned risk calibration. The 1970s were full of risks that would be illegal today. Playgrounds with metal slides that heated like frying pans. Monkey bars tall enough to qualify as minor construction scaffolding. Bikes with no helmets. Skates with no pads. Tree houses built with exactly 0 adult supervision and 100% optimism. Yes, sometimes you got hurt. But here's the psychology behind that. You learned to distinguish dangerous from worth it. Modern kids know fear of the unknown. 1970s kids knew respect for reality. Let's talk about emotional resilience. Imagine something upsetting happened at school. A rumor, a bad grade, a harsh comment. You went home and you couldn't instantly text 20 people for reassurance. You couldn't Google how to feel better. You couldn't scroll TikTok to distract yourself. You sat with those emotions, in your room, on your bed, staring at a poster on the wall, waiting for the feeling to pass. What psychologists now call emotional processing was simply daily life. 1970s kids didn't learn to avoid feelings. They learned to ride them out. That's why many adults from that generation don't crumble under pressure. They don't interpret discomfort as catastrophe. Their emotions move through them instead of controlling them. And patience, the 1970s raised experts in patience. If your favorite show aired on Thursday at 8, you either watched it live or you didn't see it. There was no streaming, no rewinding, no endless options. The anticipation was part of the experience. Waiting wasn't an obstacle. Waiting was normal. Psychologists say this built unusually strong levels of delayed gratification, a predictor for healthier relationships, better decision-making, and greater long-term success. The world moved slower in the 1970s, and so did the mind. And that slowness created depth.
Let's talk about failure. When you messed up a school project, didn't make the team, or froze during your part in the school play, nobody softened the blow. There was no everyone gets a trophy, no meeting with the principal to discuss your feelings, no parent emailing the teacher to request a grade change. You learned the simplest, most powerful psychological truth. Failure hurts, and you survived. You adapted, you improved, you tried again. This became your secret weapon. It's why so many people who grew up in the 1970s approach problems with practicality instead of panic. And finally, friendships. With no group chats, no instant communication, and no parent mediators, 1970s kids had to become experts in real social navigation. If your friend was mad at you, you had to figure out, are they joking? Are they serious? Should I apologize? Should I wait? Should I walk away? You learned micro-empathy, reading faces, moods, tones, silences. Skills that can't be taught by a textbook or a therapist. Skills that are now becoming rare. And here's the truth psychologists are finally saying out loud. Children who grew up with freedom, boredom, risk, and solitude developed resilience, creativity, and social intelligence at levels modern environments rarely produce. The 1970s generation didn't have perfect childhoods, far from it. But those imperfections shaped strengths that aren't accidental. They were designed by the world you lived in, a world that trusted you, a world that challenged you, a world that let you experience life directly instead of buffering every moment. And that's why, even today, people who grew up in the 1970s carry something steady, something grounded, something deeply capable. Not because they were told they were strong, but because they had to become strong. And they did.